Hello and welcome to our discussion. My name's Nick. We're going to be continuing, yeah, just this Bible study we've been doing. Today we're going to be talking about testimonies. So we're going to start with a few questions. Is everyone ready? Okay, cool. All right. So my first question. So can you guys recall an event in your life that was so extraordinary that you just had to tell someone about it? Can you guys remember a time like that?
I recently got engaged.
You got engaged? That's awesome. That's really cool. Can you guys think of any other like big events yeah, what were those events where like something very cool happened in your life and you had to share it with people, right? So engagement, that's a great one. Um what are some other like occasions, right? That's really good. That's awesome, Johnny. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. No, honestly, graduation, that's a great one. That was really, yeah, my graduation was really important to me. And yeah, I remember, oh, mission trips, that's a great one. I went on a few mission trips. I felt like I had to tell people about that because it was really influential to me. That's right. So, on to my next question here. What does it mean to have a testimony? What is a testimony? Does anyone think they got it?
It sounds like it's part of the law.
It sounds like it's what?
Part of the law.
Oh yeah, it sounds like it's part of the law. That's part of it. So I mean, in a general sense, uh, a testimony is evidence or proof provided by the existence or appearance of something, right? So like you could do that in the court of law. Someone might testify in the court, and that points the judge and the jury and everyone in that courtroom to find out what the truth is, right? So yeah, generally that's kind of what a testimony is. Now, in the same way, when we're talking about our testimonies when it comes to faith, when we encounter Jesus and our lives are significantly changed by him, our testimony of what he has done in our lives points towards the truth. It points towards um, the greater truth in our world, right? Yeah, that was really good. All right. So we're going to go ahead and open our Bibles. We're going to start the study. Can we find Acts chapter 9? We're going to be in Acts chapter 9 today. It's going to be in the back half of the Bible. It's right after the four Gospels. I had to remember if I was right there. I was definitely right. It is right after the Gospels. Yeah.
Excellent.
It's Acts chapter 9. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 22. So remember what we talked about. Chapter, big number, verses are the little tiny numbers in there. So, are we all there? Okay. Can I have somebody read it out? Um, and then yeah, we're gonna go ahead and listen.
But
Lost the recording there for a second, but we are back. Yeah, we had just finished reading what we were reading, so we're gonna go on now. Does anyone like think they have like a good idea of who Paul is, like who this guy is?
murder.
That's right. So before he did so Paul ended up doing all these really cool things, right? Like he wrote a lot of the New Testament and he did a lot of really great things for the early church. But before that, yeah, he was a murderer. He went out to like get these Christians. And yeah, does anyone think they can kind of like summarize what happened in the story?
He was out to murder someone, and the light shined down, and he got blinded. And then there was a guy who didn't want to heal him because he was a murderer.
Hmm. Yeah, and he ended up doing it anyway, right?
Murdering?
No, he ended up healing him even though he was afraid to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's really cool. And like, thank God he did. God really used him. Um, yeah. So a little bit of background. The book of Acts was written by the Dr. Luke. who also wrote the book of Luke. He wrote both Luke and Acts, and he wrote both of them to this man called Theophilus. So in the book of Acts, which we're in right now, Luke wanted this man Theophilus. He wanted him to know about the life of believers during the early days of the church. So, but included in this book is the story of the conversion of Paul, which we just read. This is the start of Paul's like missionary journey. So now, before we go any further, just a few discrepancies. Like God may not encounter you the same way that He did Paul here. That not saying it's an impossibility, um, but just saying like it doesn't happen to very many people. You're not. You're There's a good chance you're probably not going to be stopped in the road with a big old light shining down on you and making you go blind, and even like audibly hearing the voice of God. Not a whole lot of people. Um, not a whole lot of people get that. But yeah, so God does encounter you in different ways, and like yeah, that's something we can talk about on another day too, is that there are plenty of ways that God encounters you, but it might not look exactly like this. So, but something we want to focus on today with this passage, when God moves in your life, be prepared to share about it, right?
Mhm.
So as we read there at the end, um, once Paul was healed, he like almost immediately after hanging out with the disciples, he started preaching at the synagogues. We'll get a little more into that too. One other thing is each scripture does have a distinct purpose and innate truth behind it, right? So as we're reading, let us do our best to find the truth in the history of this passage. That sometimes it can be easy to misinterpret things, but we want to make sure that we're taking this passage for what it is, right? That being said, I've got a few questions on this, on what we've been reading. So just be prepared with your answers. Be thinking about the story. Why do you think Jesus made Saul blind? Why do you think he chose to do that while he was, walking on this path? He was going off um, to kill more Christians, but Jesus chose to make him Saul blind. Why do you think he did that?
To punish him?
To punish him? I'm sure there's I'm sure there's a piece of that in there that that he definitely wanted to like make sure like hey, what you're doing is wrong. So I'd say like there's definitely a piece of that where Jesus was reprimanding him like hey, the way you're doing things is not right. And by making him blind for a short period of time, he let him know that, right? That's really good. Anyone else? That's okay. That's
Hmm.
okay. So Jesus did make Paul blind in order to not only bring him closer to salvation, right? But yeah, also to show him that everything is not is as plain or straightforward as it seems, right? Like not everything is as plain or straightforward as it seems. This was also done to open his mind to the possibilities outside of his worldview, that for this short amount of time, he didn't have very much he could focus on with this sight, right? He was just, I'm blind, I'm being led by my friends. And this was also like the beginning process to open his mind to the fact that, hey, maybe I don't have everything right. Maybe my worldview is wrong. That's good. We're gonna go on to the next question. So if you were in the shoes of Simon, this guy who had to pray for Paul to be healed, um, who he had to heal this guy Saul, who was essentially a Christian hunter, right? He was hunting Christians down.
Right.
What thoughts would be going through your head?
Wasn't his name Ananias?
Was his name Ananias?
Yeah.
And by Simon, I clearly meant Ananias. See? No, you're all good because I make mistakes, and that was one of them. So, yes, Ananias. So, if you were in Ananias' shoes, what thoughts would be going through your head whenever God called God called him to heal this guy who was hunting down Christians? How would you feel? What thoughts would be going through your head?
He doesn't deserve to be healed.
That's a really good one. Yeah. That maybe he was thinking he doesn't deserve to be healed. And I mean, do we feel that way about some people sometimes too? Not necessarily like they deserve to be healed, but like, oh, did they deserve salvation? Or did they deserve a second chance or that kind of did they deserve to be forgiven by me or forgiven by God? That's a very real, that's really good. Thank you for sharing, Kelly. That's good. So yeah, he could have been thinking that. I mean, it must have been very hard to help someone who was once killing your people, right? Like,
But also, like, I'll be afraid that after I healed him, that he would capture me and kill me or take me away too.
there's definitely a fear in there too, yeah. That maybe he is going to take me in to prison, right? That maybe or he's going to have me stoned. One of the two, right? But due to his faith, God was able to include Ananias, not Simon. He was able to include Ananias in the story of a man who was very impactful to the ministry of the early church. And so now Ananias is always part of that story, which is really cool. That his faith, because of his faith, he got to be a part of that. That's awesome. Great job sharing, guys. Okay, we're going to go on to the next question. Okay, so question number three. Paul was called to a distinct purpose despite his history with the church, right? That, if I remember right, can I borrow your Bible? Yeah, let me borrow this because I want to make sure I actually get what God is saying here. So when God starts talking to Ananias, he actually says what Paul's purpose is, right? That he says, "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and children of Israel. For I will show him how much he will suffer for the sake of my name." And so Paul has this really awesome purpose to reach people. We were on question number three, right?
Mm.
Yes, we were. So he had this distinct purpose despite his history with the church, right? So, despite his background, why do you think God chooses broken or unqualified people to do his work? Why do you think he does that? I know it's tough. It's tough. I don't think I get it sometimes. But if you were to give your best guess of why God chooses people who are broken or unqualified to do his work, why do you think he would do that?
To humble the people that are qualified.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. To humble the people who are qualified because yeah, oftentimes we could be like, "Oh, I'm the best person for the job." And God does oppose the proud. That's right. So it's to humble the prideful, of course, and the other half of that, right, would be to exalt the humble, right? Is to exalt us, but even more than that, to also exalt his name. So and also at the end of the day, we're all broken and unqualified in all we do. What's up, Aurora?
What does exalt mean?
Exalt. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Exalt means to be lifted up. So like, um, for example, let's say you're at work and your boss says, "Hey, Aurora, you're doing a great job today." Then your boss is exalting you. They're saying, "Hey, you're doing a good job." They're lifting up your name, right? That's what it means. Thank you for asking because I don't think everyone would have gotten that. So thank you. So, but yeah, we are all broken and unqualified, right? At the end of the day. But yes, sometimes uh, God uses the least likely of people to get the job done. He does this to show us that anything is possible through him, first of all. That, like, hey, despite the circumstance, God's will, like nothing gets in the way of his will, right? And that anything's possible through him. It also shows us that our weaknesses don't limit us. In fact, Paul asks us to boast in our weaknesses because God shows his strength through them. He shows God shows his strength through our weaknesses. Where we fall short, that's where God starts, right? All right. On to the last question. It's written that Paul began to preach to others in the synagogue later in the story, right? We read that.
Hmm.
Do you think it was difficult for him to do this? And why? Do you think it was difficult for Paul to go up to the synagogue and start preaching? Because this was like he was just like going after these people.
He used to be friends with the people at the synagogue, and so now he's enemies with them. And I think that would be hard to be like paying sports teams.
That would be very hard. You're right. And I mean, especially like I think sometimes we as Christians can relate to that too, of like when we used to have like unbelieving friends, or we still do. Um, and it's just hard sometimes because the closer you get to God, sometimes the farther you get from your old friends. I think I've definitely been there before. And it's not because you like hate each other or anything like that, but it's just like it kind of naturally happens like that.
Since we don't enjoy the same things anymore.
Yeah, because we don't enjoy the same things anymore. We're trying to follow the way of God, and they're trying to follow the way of the world, which stinks, but it does happen like that. Yeah, that's a good point then, Sophie. I'm sure that there was some level of fear in Paul going up there, who was once a persecutor of those who he was trying to preach to. So you had a good point, Sophie, of bringing up that, yeah, no, his peers. Because I hadn't even thought of that. I was thinking more about the people he was persecuting, but that was an excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up. That, yeah, his peers, that would have been really hard. But also, yeah, the people he was trying to preach to, he was once a persecutor of. Maybe he even had that internal doubt of like, are they gonna believe what I say? Are they gonna listen to me? Are they gonna think it's a trap? But however, uh, at the same time, he was also overwhelmed with the second chance at life that God had given him. He was overwhelmed with what God was doing in his life. He had to share it. And that's how it ought to be with us too. Whenever God is moving in our lives and is doing cool stuff in our lives, we ought to be able to share that as well. So, as we're wrapping up, Paul may be called to preach, but I think we're getting called to wrap up here. So, next week we'll be discussing the implications uh, of salvation and what that means, what it means to be saved. Do you guys think you have a good grasp on what it means to be saved? Do you think you kind of have an idea of what that means? Well, next week we'll be getting into that a little more. Now, on the life of Paul, we will get to learn a little more about his story, life, and ministry as we go on. We're going to continue walking with Paul as he's become a new believer, right? Like many of us in this group, like I know a few of us have recently given our lives to Christ. So we're going to be following alongside Paul, who at this point in his story, he has just recently accepted Christ. And as for what we've been learning today on testimonies, how do you suppose this relates to your life as we know it? How does this relate to you guys? That's all right. That's all right. So we always we got to be prepared to share what God's been doing in our lives. And I mean, there's plenty of ways we can practice this as well. Whether that's like doing like if you guys need to like drill some like, oh, how do I tell people my testimony? And we can go into that and like how it looks like and what that structure looks like. Um, and we can get into that if you'd like to talk to me about that. And yeah, and to share what God's been doing in our lives, we also have to be growing closer to God. So, how can you guys grow closer to God this week? What are some ways you guys can be growing closer to God this week? That's good. Reading your Bible, continuing to pray. worship whenever you have the chance. You know how it is. All right. Thanks, everybody.